And good morning and welcome to Loyalty Leaders Insights, brought to you by Loyalty Summit. And we have a special guest today. Today I'm joined by Mark Nasr, who is the VP of Loyalty and CRM at Air Canada. Good morning, Mark, and welcome.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. We appreciate your time. Let's dive straight into it. 2020 was always going to be a interesting and exciting year for Air Canada. And we could have said that on the 1st of January. That seems a long time ago now. But just perhaps before we get into that, because a lot of our listeners and viewers are actually from outside of the US outside of North America. So they might not be as familiar with kind of what's been happening in the last couple of years with regard to Air Canada and its loyalty program, Aeroplan. So I thought maybe if you could maybe take a minute or two and just kind of give a very high level kind of background on the sort of why 2020 was actually already going to be such a big year for you and for Aeroplan.
Sure thing. So this is the brief history. I'll try to do it in under 2 minutes. About 15 years ago, Air Canada spun off Aeroplan. So it was started out as an in-house frequent flyer program, and then became a subsidiary that was fully owned, and then over time became a completely separate company, which went by traded by Group Aeroplan, and then eventually AMIA. As many people have come to know AMIA around the world because they've done a series of acquisitions, Europe, Asia, Australia, the United States, really around the world. And at the time at which we financially, or from an ownership perspective, completely separated from the program about 15 years ago, there was an agreement established between the two parties whereby Aeroplan would be the exclusive FFP and loyalty provider for Air Canada, and Air Canada in turn would supply seats for rewards at an advantage rate, as well as access to Star Alliance, and a number of other collaborations such as the Elite program. There's been history, obviously, over that period. Air Canada went through a very troubled decade in the 2000s. Started out with a merger with Canadian Airlines in 2000, where there was a series of challenges associated with that merger. Then obviously 9/11 and the resulting economic challenges, and then SARS, happened 2 years later. A lot of people don't know, but the only epicenter of SARS outside of East Asia was Toronto. And it totally zapped air travel demand in Eastern Canada or Central Canada, as well as, really took away Toronto's status as a connecting hub because people from throughout North America didn't want to, connect in Toronto. So SARS was a very difficult time. And, as a result, Air Canada went through a bankruptcy and then came very close to another bankruptcy. And, by the time 2009 came around with the next economic collapse, the company was in truly dire straits. And meanwhile, Aeroplan was off to the side and thriving. A turnaround started at Air Canada in 2009 and was quite successful. I can talk about it because I wasn't here until 2016, so I'm really speaking about my colleagues' work, but did a very nice job. The airline ended up growing by over 50%, and it was already a large airline to begin with, refleeted, started a new subsidiary, leisure carrier, kind of similar to Jetstar and Qantas. Ours is named Rouge, and a series of other investments in products and services and culture that really turned around Air Canada. And so by the time 2016 came around, 2017, we were looking at our contract with AMIA, which was set to expire in 2020. And we were determining what the best course of action to take. So we did a bunch of customer research, really reflected on where we were in terms of value proposition vis-a-vis other loyalty programs. The Canadian space is very competitive with bank proprietary programs. That's happened in the US just in the last 4 years, but it really started in Canada back in 2000. And what we had realized was, kind of two key things. First of all, our program had fallen behind, both in terms of level of service, It was difficult for customers because they didn't know what website do I go to, whom do I call, and there's a lot of frustration. You had to book redeem your ticket on one website, then you had to call another company's contact center, things of that nature. So that's one side of it. The other side of it was there was a series of products that we didn't offer. For example, we were, I like to say, the only airline in the free world that had no mileage upgrade capability. And so kind of the first theme was we noticed the product and the service and the customer experience suffered, and our customers were telling us that very clearly. The second part was the financial impact. If you looked at the difference of performance between Air Canada and our major US peers and competitors and partners, back in 2017, 2016, when we were doing these analyses, 2/3 of the difference in our profitability was explained by not having the loyalty program in-house. And so it became clear to us that we needed to come up with sufficient control such that we can eliminate the product and service gaps, first and foremost, and that was going to pay dividends, not just in program participation, but in love of the brand and how the brand is perceived, just as the core airline and vacations provider that we are. But then secondly, also, we needed to figure out a way to repatriate those economics. Now, there's a variety of forms it could have taken, but there was just way too much income sitting off of our statement. So we engaged in negotiations with AMIA, seeing if we could restructure the deal. But given those two, goals that I outlined, it was obviously going to be a very difficult deal to restructure. Possible, but difficult. And in the end, AMIA determined that they weren't willing to offer us what we felt we needed. And so we made an announcement in May of 2017 saying we were going to part ways with Aeroplan, with AMIA and Aeroplan. And in 2020, when the agreement was set to expire, June of 2020, we were going to launch our own program. And so, I'll very quickly talk about the 2 years after that. We were off to the races in terms of much deeper customer research, in terms of prototyping, in terms of banking negotiations to secure a new co-brand partner. And the existing co-brand partners that were, together with AMIA for Aeroplan, TD Bank, CIBC, and American Express, Visa included as the network, ended up approaching us and proposing the idea of Air Canada or them or some combination acquiring Aeroplan. And the reality was the nature of the contract that the banks had, at least TD and CIBC had with AMIA, didn't allow us to engage in discussions with them. So essentially, if Air Canada had gone its own way, then for sure, neither TD nor CIBC would have been the bank. It would have been a different partner or partners. And it very well could have been a different network, MasterCard and or Amex. Mm-hmm. We obviously were interested in the idea, mostly because it allowed for a smooth customer transition. The miles would come over, the numbers and the membership database would come over, and then as we got to learn more and more about the talent of the team would come over. We ended up engaging in negotiations with AMIA. They spilled over into the public. That's always unfortunate when that happens, but at the end of the day, we were able to reach a deal, which is a very good deal for AMIA, $450 million in cash. And then about $2 billion of liability taken away from them. And mind you, the liability had been massively underfunded. So it would have been a big risk for them had they continued. And TD and CIBC and Visa and American Express were very happy because they had continuity for their customers, and they care a lot about that customer service element and that continuity. The portfolio is also an amazing portfolio. It represents just over 1 out of every $10 spent in Canada on the consumer side. So the only portfolio that comes near it is Qantas in Australia, which is about 1/3 of spending in Australia. It's obviously a different model down there. And obviously we were happy, with the outcome. But, just to end this, and it's obviously longer than 2 minutes, so sorry for the history.
That's okay.
I can do the 3-hour version as well, but I'll spare your audience that one. We had kind of this pivotal decision, right? So we bought Aeroplan we have the IT, we have the human capital that's in there, we've got the program and the liability and the whole thing. So should we shelve the plans to build out the new program, or should we significantly reduce it and kind of more tweak Aeroplan, if you will, add mileage upgrades and call it a day? Because it's a huge investment. It's a 9-figure investment, what we're making to build a new program. And so, we looked at that very carefully. It was a decision involving, our executive committee and the board. And ultimately, as we were reflecting on the customer research, because at that point we had done 18 months of it, we determined that there was just too much friction in the current offering, particularly the digital experience. The partner network, some of it was great, but some of it had diminished over time or become less relevant in today's context. We were in the course, which we've now completed, of doing a complete re-platforming of the airline, moving off of our old patch service system to a new system. And there was a lot of capabilities that brought up. And so by virtue of having two separate tech stacks, we wouldn't be able to take advantage. Also the banks were pushing us because they very much bought into the new program versus they had quite a lot of frustration with the program, as it existed in 2017 and 2018. We decided to go ahead. It became a much more complex integration because it wasn't starting a new program. It was building a new thing and integrating everything that exists over. So we added a couple months to the timeline, and we shifted the date from June to August. And then, of course, when COVID happened, and I'm sure you'll have some questions about this, we decided to shift the date again until later the year. I can talk why that happened. But anyway, I'll stop there.
Good, Mark, that's fantastic. And it's as I kind of open the question with, not everybody who's a watcher and listener is from North America or is familiar with this history. People in our circle kind of live and breathe this, and you reminded me it's May 2017, and it feels like it was like May last year. It's in the last 3 years has definitely gone very, very, very quickly. But that brings us to kind of how I opened with, and that is that 2020 was always going to be a big year for you, as it was. Just one aspect, kind of, and you sort of touched on it as you went through with the background there, which is fantastic. But I'd like to kind of probe a little more. If we put our loyalty managers hats on, we think about, the importance of our elite programs, for example, and our elite membership, and, the fact that they drive a disproportionate share of program revenue and, bums in seats on the airline as well. But one of the things that always, there was a friction point. You touched on it, but there was a friction point between Altitude, which was your elite program, and Aeroplan, which was, the earn and redeem program. Could you touch on that a little bit in terms of some of the friction points, and how you thought through those, not just in terms of re-engineering the program, but even just in the day-to-day. If you're a program manager and you've got some friction points in your program, especially with your elite base, what would be your advice or your approach to try to minimize and manage that?
Sure. So there's a couple questions there. I'll first just get into kind of the brand confusion. So we had soup, right? We had Air Canada, we had Aeroplan, and we had Altitude. We have it today until we relaunch here. And, I say the way that I like to summarize that part of the research is we had exactly two types of customers. We had customers that were highly engaged, sophisticated, understood exactly what the corporate structure was, understood the spinoff, understood the three brands and the differences, and they just didn't care. They did not give a shit when things went wrong. They understood the differences, but they still had an expectation that, the two entities and the three brands would figure out how to work together to provide consistent customer experience and, a unified set of digital channels. So they knew and they didn't care. And that was the minority of customers. And then we had the majority that didn't know. So they were confused. In their minds, Aeroplan was and is Air Canada, and they either don't know what Altitude is, or they think of Altitude as, this thing related to Aeroplan, and they just didn't know or understand or care to understand, quite frankly, the separation. And so obviously they had exactly the same expectations that the former group had, which is things should just work. And they, many things did, but many things didn't. And that was kind of the reality from a perception perspective. As it relates to looking at the elite program, so this was something that shocked me when I came up from the U.S. So I'd worked for Continental and for United, and had experience also in the hotel industry with Hilton and Marriott, but more, as an operational person delivering benefits. I tend to think, I know loyalty programs pretty well around the world, and elite benefits and all those things. And, obviously, insofar as interviewing with Air Canada, I had, brushed up on that knowledge. But when I came to Air Canada and started diving in deeply, I was shocked at how generous some of the elite benefits were. We, for example, provide last seat availability at the saver rates in terms of redemptions to our elite members. To most of our elite members have access to a benefit like that, and the super elites, have full access to it. So there could be a $3,000 round trip to the Caribbean the week of, Christmas and New Year's in economy that you can get for 35,000 points round trip, and no surcharges, just taxes. And there's other kind of benefits like that. We provide a concierge service, which is akin to, or quite frankly, better than a concierge key or a Delta 360, to our super elite members, which is like our 100K level. And our lounge access is more European style, where it goes all the way down, to the 35K tier, even though we offer things that the Europeans don't really, like upgrades, which the US carriers offer. So it's a very, very rich program. So that surprised me. And then what also surprised me was the level of dissatisfaction with some of the benefits. So overall, our elite members really like the program, and it's very comparable to what I saw in the US, overall perception of the program and the drive to get it. But as we test, benefit by benefit, some of the most expensive benefits drive the most consternation, which is just a really bad, return on investment if you think about it, right? It just doesn't make sense. And as we were redesigning it, we sought to focus on two elements, because the elite program more of an evolution than a revolution in the new Aeroplan coming up. On the service side, we really wanted to eliminate the points of friction. So you should be able to pick up the phone, get somebody on the phone right away, and they should be able to handle your query at least 4 times out of 5, 9 times out of 10. It shouldn't rely on a transfer or additional of my coworkers that you need to speak to satisfy it. You should be able to go to one website. You should be able to have one mobile app, and all the functions, earn and burn, whether you're traveling on a reward ticket or a paid ticket, for seat assignments, upgrades, whatever it is, they should all be there. And so there's a lot of focus on that. The second is looking at these few benefits that are really market leading, where we invest more than our competitors invest, and making sure that we're communicating them and we're structuring them in such a way where we're getting the full value and members are enjoying the experience. And that really speaks to trying to remove kind of gotchas, to make the benefits a lot more clear and universally accessible. So like what I like to call it is, you can either design for breakage or you can design to maximize utilization. We've designed to maximize utilization.
It's funny, Mark, and I probably should have touched on it in the introduction, but I mean, you do have a very long and varied background, airlines and hotels. And it's an interesting point you bring up about the operational delivery side of the equation, because it's really easy for people to think about things like call center friction. Hang on a minute, I've got I'm an elite member, but I've got to call this other call center, or I can't get this fee waived even though I'm an elite member. That's really easy to understand. And the average member understands that the minute they've had one single experience, or they've had a friend or a colleague or a family member who's had a single experience like that. And they can relate, because those sort of experiences and friction points are the same in other industries, retail, or otherwise. But when we talk about operational delivery, I think sometimes this is a friction point for members in both airlines and hotels. In all loyalty programs, but particularly airlines and hotels. And it's a side that I think, around the world, members often, they don't understand why it's a problem. They see, for example, a list of published benefits on the airline's website for, if you're a super elite member, you get A, B, and C. And then they get to the airport and something doesn't work as it should. Qantas has battled for years with things like priority boarding domestically. And there's disconnect often between not just the loyalty program and operational staff on the ground, but there's often disconnect between, between the airline's goals or the hotel's goals and priorities, what the loyalty program publishes, and what members value and expect. So there's a perception issue, there's expectation issues, all of that. And I want to kind of touch back to your, your experience back in the day in hospitality. I think that in the modern age, hospitality programs struggle with this sometimes even more than airlines do because of the asset light model, which didn't used to be the prevalent model, but today is. One hotel program manager, I won't name, but made a comment to me a few years ago, which really stuck in my mind. And anyone who knows me knows I repeat this all the time because. He said to me straight out, if he had one thing he wishes for, he wished hotels own the medal, because at least with an airline, you can solve the problems in the corporate office, and directives or new standard operating procedures can emanate from the corporate office and they can be enforced down the line, whether it's at the gate or at the check-in counter. With a hotel environment that's asset light, you're dealing with third-party owners. Now, when we talk about that in a spin-off model, do you think that that's analogous when you have a spun-off loyalty program, you are dealing with a completely independent third party? Do you think that that's analogous in terms of bringing in extra friction points and difficulty in solving these problems, even once you identify them?
I think that's a great point. Certainly, I think there's an analogy to be drawn there. It manifests itself a little bit different because one thing the hotel chains, Hilton was probably the leader of this, and it goes back to their acquisition of Promise about 20 years ago. But one thing the hotels have going for them is, imposing tech stacks on individual properties. And there's a lot more action in that area just in the last few years. IHG, Marriott, there's a lot of investment happening finally in property management systems. And that helps a lot with loyalty delivery. It also helps with subtle psychological nudges. Back in 2003, Hilton had the capability of, to every front desk agent, on their on-queue, their System 21 back then, indicating elite status, showing, repeat stay patterns, guest preferences, so on and so forth. And that was messaged to the agent right there in the path. And, that's not capabilities that, from my understanding, Marriott has very broadly today, although I understand they're going to introduce something great soon more broadly. In kind of the airline spin-off loyalty model, you don't have control of the tech stack. At least that was not the experience, with Aeroplan. And from the limited knowledge I have of other programs, that have kind of a similar-ish model, I don't think that's the case. That makes it a lot harder. The other thing is the hospitality industry, I would say, is particularly good at customer service training. And that's something that in general, the airline industry, probably isn't quite as good at, because the airline industry is a lot more skills and safety focused. So we're certainly better in those regards. But, hospitality does a very good job of, taking somebody off the street. And, these are not typically high paying jobs either, service level, frontline, and instilling to them the culture of the brand and the value of the loyalty program. Now, as chains have grown so much and there's been consolidation, that's probably become a little bit more difficult to relay the brand story and the master brand, the Marriott, the Hilton versus the Hampton Inn or the Courtyard or whatever, and how the loyalty program connects to it. And that's probably why we've seen, some degradation of the elite experience at some hotel chains, or at least I've read about it and heard about it from travelers. But at the same time, I think the hotels do a remarkably good job of providing consistency, given how broad and how internationalized these portfolios are now. So Air Canada, right? We have to manage through, 33,000 people, at least pre-COVID, of, training. And they all touch one of our home bases, every week or so. And, if you are one of the big hotel chains, you're dealing with 6,000, 7,000 properties and hundreds of thousands of people representing, literally dozens and dozens of cultures and languages. And that's hard.
There's absolutely no doubt about that. Sometimes I feel, sometimes I feel some of these challenges are challenges that, the program managers need to start thinking that there needs to be workarounds, you can't tackle them head on. The model just doesn't work. As you say, hundreds of thousands of people completely disparate. They don't touch the head office. You're never going to get that level of training that you're perhaps an airline can, and even an airline sometimes struggles. So it's interesting you focus on the tech stack as being a big part of the solution, and I think that's fascinating. And I want to come back to tech and data in a few minutes. I want to sidetrack to a little bit. Last week on the show, we raised an interesting question, and I know Mark Ross Smith published something yesterday. Should heads of loyalty be C-level? Should you are the perhaps I should depersonalize this from Mark Nasr and Air Canada, but as an illustration, you're VP of loyalty and CRM. Should you be the chief loyalty officer? And when I say you, I should phrase the question as depersonalized, and we'll talk more general. I don't want to get you in trouble.
Sure. Look, so first of all, I take Mark. By the way, Mark's a brilliant guy, and I respect him a lot. I take his point a little less literally on the rank of the person, of course, although that would be nice, and a little bit more on the role that loyalty plays in the organization and how it's viewed and prioritized by the CEO and the board. If you take it in that respect, especially in a North American context, and this should apply, I think, to some other but not all geographies, I think he's absolutely correct. It helps me tremendously. So I'll just go through the Air Canada C-suite for a moment. So there's Kayla Revenue, who's our CEO, who was involved with the restructuring that led to, the Aeroplan business being separated back in the day. So he knows that business intimately well. Our chief commercial officer, you see, started her career as an Aeroplan call center agent and built her career up via that. Our chief operations officer, Craig, led and ran Aeroplan for about 10 years and actually was spun out into Aeroplan and came back home to Air Canada a number of years ago. And our CHRO was one of the lawyers who did the spin out and negotiated the contract between the two entities. So of our C-suite, all but two have backgrounds or are loyalty people. And I am tremendously lucky to be in that situation. And it goes to something else Mark was talking about, which is the RM, debate, which maybe we should discuss as well, because that's a very interesting subject. And so, with that context, loyalty is very much a front and center topic at Air Canada, which helps us get the investments that we argue for, which helps continue to prioritize the initiatives. And also there's kind of this broader understanding of the loyalty business, which, by the way, has different economics and different accounting from the airline business. And just that, accounting knowledge alone makes a big difference. You don't spend, I remember, in a formal world, you'd spend 30 minutes just trying to get people to understand, when you recognize the revenue and, why redemption is important and so on and so forth. I mean, our folks walk in with that as second nature. They've forgotten more than I'll ever know about it, quite frankly. And then, the other interesting dynamic is, maybe somewhat paradoxical in nature, but loyalty is important at Air Canada right now because we spun it out. And so we experienced all of the downsides. So there were upsides, obviously, but there were also downsides, right? And we experienced all of those downsides for the last, decade in particular. And the folks that I just mentioned, they had all the frustrations in the world trying to achieve certain things or hearing from our customers about the friction points. And so now that it comes back home, we don't take it for granted. I would say there are other airlines that I've seen, from the outside at least, some of our partners, for example, that kind of seem to take it for granted. And if they had the experience of what it's like to lose control of it and to not be able to leverage it when you really need it, like now, for example, I think that there would be a very different tune and different level of focus on it. So I agree with Mark's point overall. I don't think the title matters as much, and this might be a career limiting statement on my part. I think the title really speaks to the individual and how capable they are, and maybe what else is grouped of loyalty. I, for example, responsible for e-commerce as well. But I think the bigger part is reporting structure. So I report directly to the CEO, so you should report to either the CFO or the CCO or to the CEO, I think, as head of loyalty. This should be a topic of conversation with the board of directors. This should be a regular update for the C-suite, whether it's an E-team or an XCOM or whatever it is, each airline's parlance. I think that's critical.
No, and I think that's a good point. I mean, I think what we're talking about here is executive sponsorship, or a C-level sponsorship, and ownership of the importance of loyalty. And I mean, we talked just a couple of minutes ago about friction points and operational delivery challenges in both the airline space and the hotel space. Loyalty wants to get something done, but it conflicts with other priorities. And I'll say it, I'll use the word, the other silos in the organization. And big hotels and big airlines are full of silos. We can deny it all we want, but the reality is we are massive bureaucracies in these big programs. But to the point you just made, and I keep using the example because there's plenty of material, but if we look a little bit south of the border from you, we have airlines that jump on earnings calls and CEOs that refer to the loyalty program as the card program. Now, when you're pulling in billions of dollars a year in co-brand billings, that's great. The card program is important to you, but it really does a disservice. The loyalty program itself is seen as nothing more than that. And now that we're in 2020, and maybe we'll pivot to a 2020 related discussion, the loyalty program is kind of important this year. Before I can ask how you're leveraging it, I just want to remind our viewers as well, there is a chat function as well. Obviously, we've got a lot to get through with Mark in a short amount of time, but if you have questions, please put them in. We'll certainly try to get to them. How has the COVID-19 situation kind of derailed how you thought 2020 was going to go? I mean, you mentioned earlier about you bumping back the launch date, but you've been a busy team over there as well the last couple of months. There's been a lot going on. But how has it kind of made you kind of adjust for things on the fly?
Sure. Well, obviously, the relaunch of a loyalty program sometimes seems like a trivial little matter, in the space of everything else going on. And I do want to acknowledge that. I mean, I think, the two of us and the community you've assembled on this call, we're all practitioners. And so we really focus on that. So, I just don't want anyone to misplace my passion for the answer and focus on it as, a misunderstanding of what's going on in the broader world, and the broader economy. That being said, obviously, this is something we're very serious about and very focused on and extremely passionate about. Canada has in certain provinces have certain notice of change requirements. So, as I said, we were originally planning on relaunching in August, but that would have necessitated May full communications of the program. And we would have had to lock in May and March. So we were sitting there in March as the world really seemed to be falling apart. And we said to ourselves, look, we're just not willing to make a commitment right now, and certainly ask our partners, in particular the banking partners, to make a commitment, for being out there in May with this message. So we decided to delay it to Q4. And it allowed us to move the notice period as well as kind of the go, no go, decisions that we have of our partners on the notice period. But the reality is we looked at the situation, we said, that there truly is in tragedy, there's opportunity, and, when the going get tough, the tough get going, I think it is. And so we said, we're just not gonna, we refuse to accept that we have no control or influence on the situation. And we refuse to accept that even though flying might not be relevant right now, the program will become less relevant to our members. We just refuse to accept that. Let's start off at a place where that's just not true. And how do we try to influence our own destiny? How do we try to take control of that, all while being extremely sensitive to two things. First and foremost, just the atmosphere and the health issues and the government, edicts or the government requests, respectful of those. And then number two, sensitive to our economic situation, because a loyalty program can always generate engagement by investing a ton, essentially giving away a bunch of miles or doing other things, that are expensive, media dollars, whatever have you. So we need to do it in a way that, is considered classy and respectful, by the public, and in a way where internally we're not, trying to take resources away from every other deserving department in a time where we're furloughing people and doing pay cuts and other very tough things. So we came up with a template. We did very quick research. In this case, we spent about a week on it. And we came up with a template that says if offers and engagement and news can check at least 2 or 3 boxes, and hopefully all 3, it should be our recipe for some amount of success during this period. So box 1, provide new value to the member that the member can take advantage of. Box 2, given there's so much focus on friends and family and communities, how can we also provide offers and opportunities that allow members to share either now or later with their friend and family network? And then box 3, what about the broader community and society? And given a loyalty program, for travel is, risks being considered a selfish proposition, even though I truly believe it's not, during this period, how do we ensure we're also being mindful of the community? And with that, we started out by launching an initiative called Travel at Home. And Travel at Home had in it what we were doing to take care of elite members, had a very significant charitable component, which totally blew our expectations, had in it incentives to transfer in points from other, currencies like American Express membership rewards, which, is a builder of gross billings for us, obviously. And a number of other promotions. And we could do that immediately. We actually put together the entire campaign, did all the IT, everything in 72 hours. Huge, kudos to the loyalty team and our brand team, kind of working around the clock with our IT folks for that. And then we said, okay, what are the mid and longer term things? So we advanced a number of partnership conversations. We announced last week a partnership with Uber Eats. I can't imagine anything that's more relevant, from a partnership discussion. It's a brilliant partnership. You get for the first week 10 times miles per dollar, which makes it the richest, food delivery offer we know in the world. And our steady state offer is 2 miles plus accelerators for elite members and high earners, even if they don't have elite status. So 3-4 miles per dollar. That's Canadian dollar, so it's times 1.4 for a U.S. equivalent in earn rates. So there's just a number of things that we've been doing and continue to do, again, with the focus on hitting on those 3 boxes. Finally, we started to pre-announce features of the new loyalty program. 3 in particular are bid upgrade system with PlusGrade, our B2C points relationship with Points Inc., and our airline partnership with Etihad. And it's really, given, the blogger coverage and the media coverage, we've been very grateful for. It's been quite positive. We've reached tens of millions of people around the globe with those initiatives, which is kind of cool. And, the points.com in particular, I'll talk about this one. This is just crazy. So, like selling points to consumers, not new, not particularly innovative. We are totally late to the party. Like upgrades, we're the only airline in the free world and even the non-free world that wasn't doing it, I feel like. And we launched it in the middle of the height of like COVID lockdowns. This was April initiative, right? Into early May. And you can double check with points. I don't think I'm exaggerating. I believe our sale did 3 times the highest traffic they've ever done in their history. And mind you, they have much larger programs: Advantage, Mileage Plus, Bonvoy, than little Air Canada Aeroplan. And I think it just shows kind of structuring a promotion correctly. And again, it ticked all 3 boxes. In particular, there was a strong charitable component for a mental health organization in Canada. And huge kudos to Points, because they stood up multiple times in supporting that charitable partnership. They've been spectacular on every front. I can't say enough good things about them, and that's not true of all of our partners, I'll tell you. So yeah, that's how.
Nice things. We had Rob on the show a few weeks ago, so you can definitely say nice things about them.
All right. Well, this has not been a paid advertisement. In fact, it's the opposite. I pay Rob, and I want to say all the good things I can about Sasha and Rob and the Points team. They're just phenomenal as a tech company and as a partner.
No, just on some of the initiatives, and as you say, it was a difficult time period, and I think Air Canada, one of the things that got everybody's attention was, you stepped up to the plate during a period that, to be honest, most program managers, and we discussed this on the show right here, program managers were scratching their heads going, do I do anything? Do I not do anything? Do I communicate with members? Do I not communicate with? If I communicate with them and I say the wrong thing, I'm going to make the problem worse. They don't want to hear from us, generally speaking. There's definitely a period of time our members did not want to hear from us unless we were basically reassuring them that we had their backs. It was a very, very, very fine line. And I think it's fair to say not every program got that right. One of the first topics we talked about, which was very topical, obviously, back at the beginning of this crisis, was status extensions. I think all of us in the industry have had, to use the buzzword, an evolving thought process on this. If we go back to February, I think most people in the industry were thinking along the lines of, look, we probably will. Of course, we're going to look after our members. But it's the beginning of the year. If you're a calendar year program, we've got plenty of runway left. Why don't we just revisit this in the second half of the year? Maybe we need to have a policy for China and perhaps Asia Pacific, but we can just take our time. Now that very quickly, obviously evolved, as we know how history turned out. But you really took it a step further, didn't you? Because one of the biggest problems or challenges with program managers doing status extensions is you take the golden handcuffs off and you give your members no reason to fly with you later in the year for those members that have some flying activity to give in 2020, acknowledging not everybody does. But for those members that are going to get on a plane in 2020, we want them to stay on our airline. And a number of programs around the world just didn't include any mechanism to encourage that. How did you approach that differently? Can you talk to that for a minute?
I was totally and completely wrong about this, and thank goodness the team overruled me. I would have screwed the pooch had we gone with my point of view on this. I'll give you my point of view, and I'll give you what we actually did. Mm-hmm. My point of view was, totally fact-based. It's still really early in the year. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't want to do, this is kind of like the 3 bears, Goldilocks. We don't want to do too much. We don't want to do too little. We want to do the thing that's just right. And let's take a wait and see approach. Let's holding statement this as much as we can. I started to see, obviously, like you said, Asia Pacific. Then the hotel chain started, and then it came down to what Delta did, and United very, very, very quickly followed up after Delta. And I was totally wrong about it. And for all the concerns you mentioned, right? Like I was worried that we would do too little and be criticized for not doing enough. I was worried we'd do too much. And your term, golden handcuffs. I don't know that I love that term, but those were your words, so I'll quote it. I was concerned that there were other ways of driving the engagement. We could do something potentially with the co-brand portfolio. We could do something with other partners in the program. What about certificates, and what about all the other elements of status, so on and so forth. My team's point of view, in particular, two of them, was about just the emotion in the situation and the idea of this being a brand defining moment. So it's what you do, it's how you do it, and it's when you do it. And sometimes you just have to do the right thing. Like sometimes there just are things that are perceived and thought to be right and wrong. and the perception makes them right and wrong in and of itself. And I hate to say emotion because I don't mean it in a pejorative way. I mean it in a positive way. But there is emotion with this stuff, especially status. One of the reasons why airline loyalty programs are so bloody successful is because there is emotion wrapped in them. So like we can't pick and choose. We like emotion here and we don't like emotion there. It sounds nice, doesn't work. And so we made the decision to just 100% roll over all status, right? But then we said, okay, well, there were people that already earned status this year, and my gosh, they're going to be upset. They could be, some of them, and they would have been because some people reached out to us. And there were other people that, you know, as flying comes back, as we hope it will, and it has started to for the rest of the year, we want to make sure to provide an incentive. So here's where we took a page out of kind of those 3 check boxes that I talked about, and the, you know, 18 months of in-depth research we had done for the new loyalty program. And, you know, this notion of family and friends being involved with status benefits, it's just incredibly powerful. And so we announced, you know, everyone's going to roll over 100%, no questions asked, you know, in terms of folks that earned status last year. But if you earn status this year, you can pick and choose and give it to a friend and family member. And if you're a million miler and you can already give away status, you can now give status to another person. And if you take, we actually have as a benefit option sharing status. If you do that, you can give away status yet to another person. So you can double and triple dip. You can do whatever you want with this benefit, but we're going to give full status of whatever you earned. And, you know, the reaction we got, it floored me. I was not expecting it. I was wrong about this file. I was wrong about the emotions. I was totally, 180 wrong about this. And not just about the status extension, but about the reaction, how positive the reaction we would get at the end of the day for what we did is. And I think at the end of the, when kind of the history books are written about this, if you will, what will be noted was we did something that just seemed fair with a shade of generosity to it. It wasn't, the greatest giveaway in the history of the industry or the program, but it was the right thing to do at the right time with a little cherry on top. And I think people appreciated that.
It's interesting because, as we know, and as you say, as loyalty practitioners, we know that emotion is such an important ingredient in how elite programs work. Especially loyalty programs are in totality, but especially elite programs. And it's because it's a relationship. And it's like any other relationship in people's lives, there's an element of there's reciprocity, there's trust, and there's disappointment if one party doesn't, live up to the expectation, or doesn't demonstrate that, hey, relationships go both ways. But it's interesting you say about the reaction to the ability to include family and friends component in that status extension. And it reminds me of, all the data I've ever seen, whether it be customer research data, academic studies, the anecdotes you get from members in any of these programs, large or small. The reality is the bread and butter of major program, elite programs are, business travelers. And business travelers time and time again will tell you, what, when I'm staying at the airport hotel, ahead of a red eye, I don't care about the upgrade to the suite, but I do care about it when I come and stay on a redemption stay on the weekend with my family. Even the upgrade to first class or whatever it might be, whether it's a points upgrade clearing or a complimentary upgrade or access to the lounge. Sometimes I don't care about it when I'm on a quick layover on a business trip, when all I want to do is basically just get to the office or get home. But when I'm traveling with my family, I want them to have a nice experience. To be honest, I want to be able to show off, and time again, we see through the data and the customer research and the anecdotes, the biggest point that business travelers make is I'm away from home so often. This is my way to give back to my family and to be able to let them get some benefit from putting up with me being away so much, and whether that's dad being away, mum being away, doesn't matter who it is. We say that all the time. So it's a really interesting point. And it's funny, in hindsight, we look back and we're probably like, oh, well, of course it worked. But thanks for sharing the way your thought process works. I know we're getting close to time, but a couple of other points I want to make. Very quickly, I want to get the obligatory thanks to our sponsors in there. Amia, Engage, Adara. We do have our physical loyalty summits coming back online. We're going to have announcements about that very soon. So please stay tuned to loyaltysummit.com. You can also link to our replays of our webcast and subscribe to our new YouTube channel. all important stuff. But when we talk about our physical loyalty summits, and Mark, hopefully we're going to see you at our next Americas-based one. Hilton Honors is our hotel partner and sponsor for that. And our next loyalty summit in London, Radisson Rewards, is our hotel partner and sponsor for that one as well. So I want to thank them. A couple of last questions to finish on. We talk a lot in the industry about using data, leveraging data, using our programs to drive incremental revenue. Do you have a favorite insight that you're able to share, in terms of Aeroplan, and how you've been able to perhaps use data in a smart manner that benefit both the member and the airline?
Well, it's kind of funny. I've had this conversation a few times with Brian Summers, your other guest last week. I've told them there's two kinds of loyalty organizations. There's one that talk a big game with data and do nothing or very little, and there's others that are doing a lot with it but don't want to tell you because there's some secret sauce or brilliance, and they feel that I won't tell you which group I think we're in. You can imagine. But we're pretty tight-lipped about those things. I will maybe answer your question in a slightly different way if I could. Again, I go back to that theme of having separated the loyalty program and having lost access to so much data, and then having brought it back in. And AMIA had done a really brilliant job of investing in the data infrastructure and building out this amazing analytics team. One of the advantages, quite frankly, of the spin-off, big advantages that we've been, enjoying now. On day one, we were, of course, there's applicable law and there were certain restrictions, what we couldn't do. So, just put those in a box for a moment. We were like kids in a candy shop insofar as we could be about combining Air Canada data, particularly PSS and e-commerce data, with our loyalty data. And that really has been the big innovation for us, if you will. So I hate that word, but that's been the big change and the big advancement for us over the last year. And we've been working, as you know, we did that PSS with Amadeus. And Amadeus has been a good partner and has introduced a number of new capabilities for us. And one of those capabilities allows us, in effect, along with our marketing technology stack, to tie together our partner spend data, our loyalty data, and the footprint of kind of like the clickstream data that we have from interaction of digital channels, and use it to make our digital marketing a lot more efficient, and then also use it to become more intelligent on how we target core airline and loyalty products through our channels. Again, I don't like to give too many details other than to say we just do a much better job now in recognizing customers and tying a more complete picture of who they are that allows for different segmentation. Before, Air Canada had one segmentation all based on flying, and Aeroplan had numerous segmentations based on what the challenge was. We brought that together, and we now have a number, kind of like about half dozen different segmentation models that we use on a regular basis that inform things like propensity to upsell. Do we offer this person, a business class upgrade, or do we offer them trip insurance, or do we offer them lounge access or a meal, in the booking path? Which of our branded fares are best suited to this consumer given the trip type that we can, sense? Is it 7 days? Is it 1 day? Is it with another passenger? Is it solo? And, just recognizing customers that they land on our channel, because before we didn't have the member database. So something just as simple as the unique identifier from, the member. Air Canada had done a really good job of building a non-member database. Aeroplan had done a really good job of building a member database. And we were able to, not literally, but in effect, put those two pictures together of members and non-members and really expand our addressable, marketable audience and how relevant we can be to them.
It's a fantastic illustration because we all talk the data game, and we all emphasize the importance of the program driving incremental revenue, but thinking about how it can be put into practical action, I think is really important for everyone to always keep their eye on the ball. It's great to talk about it, but you've got to be able to translate that into actionable insights that you then actually do something with. I know we're coming to time, and I know you've got to run to another meeting. So I just see we've got a note from Rob from Points, who just to confirm that the success of the campaign that you ran is correct. He says it's the highest traffic day and largest revenue to our partner for any campaign in Points.com's history, including pre-COVID. He says it's a fantastic indication of loyalty to the Aeroplan brand, the depth of pent-up demand, as well as the power of a well-thought-out offer. So, it really, really was. So well done on that. Well done on that. I think there was a lot of excitement. Everything I hear coming out of the Canadian market is that there is a lot of excitement for the new Aeroplan, or whatever name it might, whatever name the program might have in terms of branding. But in terms of Air Canada's new loyalty program, the relaunch, obviously people are excited for this pandemic to be over, to get back to business, back in the air, back to visiting family, and in time, all of that will happen. So I think that, look, it's like the roller coaster of the theme park, right? Buckle in, keep your hands and legs inside the ride at all times. And, 2020 is just shaping up to be that year. And that's what we need to do. So, Mark, I know we're at time. I want to thank you again for joining us. I want to remind everybody, next week's show, we have Rob Burgess of Head for Points and Gilbert Ott of God Save the Points coming on to talk about loyalty promotions. Very topical, following up from this one, and making sure your promotions are relevant. And I think that, Mark, you've shared some great examples of promotions that are relevant and can work. We know in the market there's been some that have missed the mark. Next week's show will be interesting. Thanks again for joining. Do you mind? We've had some questions we haven't got time to get to. Do you mind if we send you some follow-up questions, which we can publish on Travel Data Daily afterwards?
Sure, it'd be a pleasure. Look, thank you so much for having me on today, and thanks to the audience. And I can confirm it will be called Aeroplan. So you could take that as some breaking news if you want. But
terrific. Well, thanks, Mark. Hopefully we can get you on again, and hopefully we can have you join our physical Loyalty Summit in the Americas once we relaunch that as well, hopefully in the not too distant future.
Thank you so much, David. Have a great day.
Great. Thanks again. Bye now.
Goodbye.